This episode of Keys to the Shop is brought to you by Prima Coffee. Whether it's espresso machines, manual brewing devices, or general coffee shop needs, they seek to pursue the most innovative coffee products, both domestic and abroad, to offer their customers. Find out more at prima-coffee.com. This is Keys to the Shop, episode 66, Shaping and Developing Your Team, with Beth Garrison. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DeFirio. I'm your host. Really glad to have you along today. We're talking with a special guest today, Beth Garrison, all about shaping and developing your team, how we can affect positive behavior in the workplace, in our cafes. It's going to be a great conversation. And before we dive into that, I want to thank our sponsors here at Keys to the Shop, and that, of course, is Prima Coffee. Now, Prima Coffee is a specialty coffee equipment supplier, and they're based out of Louisville, Kentucky, right here in my hometown here. And from the beginning of their company, they've set out to make the best coffee brewing equipment available to the general public. Their focus is on curating the best equipment for every need, and they really do curate their equipment. They put a lot of thought into it. Just grinders, espresso machines, under-counter fridges, practically anything you can think of for your cafe or even just your home bar setup. They have a great variety and really quality items to choose from. To see what they have to offer, go to prima-coffee.com and take a look. Go through their website, look at what they have to offer, and explore the resources too that are also available beyond the expertise they have. Just getting the right gear for every situation that their customers have. They have resources online as well, videos talking about how to use the equipment, how to clean the equipment. They're just doing a really fantastic job. So go to prima-coffee.com, reach out to them. I've always been pleased using Prima Coffee through the years, and I know you will be as well. So my thanks to Prima Coffee for their support of Keys to the Shop and also just supporting us as an industry, helping us do our jobs well by providing us the tools we need to do our jobs well. So now today's episode, Shaping and Developing Your Team. One of the things that's just fresh in our memories in this new year, and by the way, Happy New Year to you. It is the first episode back in 2018. It was a fantastic year last year. Feels weird to say that since this is being recorded still in 2017. But glad to be joining you in 2018 here. So one of the things that we've all gone through, if you work in coffee retail, was the holiday season. And, we all know that stress produces a lot of different behaviors in individuals and therefore in teams. A lot of us have had the experience where we rise to the occasion and we are our best self. And a lot of us, unfortunately, also experience that time where we and the people who work with us are exhibiting behaviors, especially under stress, that are less than helpful in the moment. So now looking back at that and forecasting into this new year, how can we take what we've seen? Maybe we've made some discoveries about the way we react under pressure, or our coworkers or people that you lead. How can we take charge of kind of shaping and developing the way that individuals and teams behave in your cafes? I think that is going to be a question we can answer today with the help of our guest, Beth Garrison. Beth Garrison is a board-certified behavior analyst. She's a licensed behavior specialist and holds a master's degree in education in applied behavior analysis from Temple University. She has experience in organizational development and instructional design. She has served as a director of training and development, supervising staff working in the field, as well as designing and implementing competency-based trainings. Beth is the former CEO of an adult services division where she was charged with developing and maintaining quality clinical services for adults diagnosed with developmental disabilities in the state of Pennsylvania. And she currently is the senior consultant for Shaping Development, LLC, an organization committed to helping people shape individual, staff, and organizational development. And in her spare time, she serves as the CEO of Operant Coffee, LLC, a company that's committed to combining her love of behavior analysis and coffee. We all know what that's about here. By disseminating behavior analysis and helping people serve amazing coffee. Beth is an adjunct instructor for Temple University, where she teaches basic and applied level courses in applied behavior analysis, as well as careers in psychology courses. So today's episode is going to give us a little peek into the world of behavior analysis and what it is that it can do for us and teach us when it comes to developing our cafe's staff, both as individuals and as a team. And as we'll learn in this episode, the behavior of an individual is basically what makes up the behavior of a team. We'll talk about 5 components of a healthy team. What are the main influences when it comes to, why people behave the way they do in the workplace and more. So I'm excited to bring this episode to you because, we always are learning and developing our ability to be a more cohesive team and lead people better as well. Even if it's just yourself and you want to change your own behavior, I think today's episode is going to illuminate some things for you. So let's get to our conversation now on shaping and developing teams with Beth Garrison. Well, hi, Beth. Welcome to Keys to the Shop. I'm really pleased to have you.
Thanks, Chris. I'm really excited to be here today.
I really have been reading your blog, reading your work. You're an expert in behavior analysis. And I feel like today's topic of, developing teams and, creating great cohesive structure in our teams is going to be such a useful one. And it's a lot of what you end up doing in behavior analysis. And it's kind of a mysterious field of study when I think of the term. I wonder if you could demystify it for us and kind of describe your field and what it is you do, and specifically with teams, what it is you do.
Sure. So behavior analysis is the official textbook title or definition of it is the science of analyzing socially significant behaviors and shaping them within the environment that those behaviors are performed. So what we do in behavior analysis is we really look at behavior as being something that is a part of the environment, very much a part of the environment, and that there are things that happen before behaviors that could trigger behavior. There are things after behaviors that increase or decrease the likelihood that they'll keep occurring. So when it comes to teams, it's actually, obviously when we're working in a team, socially significant behaviors are very much a part of acting in a team. So within behavior analysis, we are looking at, what are the team behaviors that we want to be looking at, defining them in observable, measurable terms, and then analyzing the environment that surrounds that team so that we can help the team meet their performance goals.
Okay, so when you come into a situation, when you're called in because you do consulting as a behavior analyst, you start probably from a set of core tenets, I imagine. What would the kind of core tenets of behavior analysis be when you come in and you say, what's the toolkit used by a professional in your field?
So we use a lot of different assessments when we're coming in to analyze behavior. One of the major ones that we use, which it's just best practice, it's one of the major assessments we use is what's referred to as a functional behavior assessment. So when we come in to analyze anybody's behavior, and I've worked with children, I've worked with adults, I've worked in many different settings. This is one of the major assessments I use as a behavior analyst because I'm coming in and observing the behavior in the environment that it's occurring. And based on my observation, I'm collecting data on that. defining the behaviors clearly. And then from that, I'm also analyzing why people are doing what they're doing. And that's really the purpose of a functional behavior assessment, is to figure out the function of the behavior. So why do they keep performing these behaviors in that specific environment? So I would look at the antecedents. What are the things that happen right before the behavior occurs? And then I would also look at the consequences. What happens right after the behavior occurs? And then just continuing to collect data on that. Based on that information, I can come up with a pretty good hypothesis on why somebody's doing what they're doing. In behavior analysis, we are like most of the social sciences in that we are not going to put an intervention or a performance plan in for someone unless we've collected those data. So it's really important for us to collect baseline data and collect those assessment data before we put in place any sort of recommendation for anybody that we're consulting with.
Fascinating. Like, so the environment, it sounds like, is such a huge factor in, there are triggers for behavior.
Yes.
And those are the antecedents that you're talking about.
Yes.
And you kind of assess how nurture in the environment creates certain behaviors. Is that a fair way to put it?
Yeah, that's a pretty good way to put it. Yeah, we are definitely looking at those things that would keep those behaviors occurring. People do things for a reason. They don't keep doing things, for no reason. So we're really looking at, we're really looking at how, what those reasons are. And if we can figure that out based on those assessments, we can come up with, recommendations for, leaders, managers, anybody who is working with people and behavior, on how to, meet the goals of that person.
And most of the time when you're called in to a situation, it seems like you're called in because there's a change that somebody wants to see happen. There's a behavior happening that they don't like. Is that most of the time?
Yes, unfortunately, we get called in when there's a problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I would love to be called in for times when people say things are going great. But yeah, most of the time we're called in when there's a problem.
Well, you could probably use what you do to continue behavior that you like too, couldn't you?
Absolutely. Behavior analysis, behaviors are behaviors. So the behaviors you want to see are just as mediated by the environmental variables as the behaviors you don't want to see. So, which is important too when we do our functional behavior assessments, is looking at the behaviors we do see that we want to keep seeing and looking at the variables that surround them too. And making sure that they continue to happen so that we keep seeing those behaviors we want to see.
Wow. So this is something that a lot of managers and a lot of owners wish that they could just, get like a magic wand and change people's behaviors, change what they do. And what they're left doing a lot of times, and I've done this myself too, we see a behavior and we judge the intention of that behavior to be, oftentimes we'll say it's kind of a malevolent motive. Like they're doing it because they're lazy, or they're doing it because they're trying to get back at me, or something like that. Do you find to be true the old saying that you can't manage intention, you can only manage behavior?
So I actually kind of look at it from a different perspective, I guess, in that I kind of think that intention is a verb, is a noun, and it's a state. It's not necessarily a behavior. So that's something where I would look at intention as a behavior and then defining that a little bit more. So we might say that somebody is intending to do something, and then that might be a little bit more of a definition. Mm-hmm. I think you get to a really good point in that, a lot of times, yes, when we come into scenarios, there are times where people are saying, it's almost like people are kind of taking things very personally, which they should. It's their workplace. It's where they spend most of their time throughout the day. That this person's doing this just to get back at me, or this person's intent is to hurt my feelings, or, these kinds of things. As behavior analysts, we kind of take an outside look, more from the, like I said, earlier from the environmental perspective, kind of going outside of the organism themselves or the person themselves and seeing it from the broader perspective. So what are those, again, going back to, the core tenets, what are those antecedents? What are the consequences that happen after the behavior? What is your past history with the person? And yes, we can look at those as that is also being an environmental variable. But, when we think about intent, it's not necessarily what we would look at as being a function of a behavior. We would kind of be looking at it as, from an outside perspective. By saying somebody's intending to do this, we're not that person. So we can't really say that that for sure, but we can definitely define what's happening outside of that person.
Right.
So I don't know if that answers your question.
Oh, I think it does. And it sounds like what we do is we create scenarios where people are forced into a particular set of behaviors, or not forced, but it's easier for people to act a particular way. And when it reaches, critical mass is when we as leaders start to notice it, but we weren't paying attention to the development of that environment that gave rise to it, and conveniently leave ourselves out of the whole, like, maybe you created this problem category.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. You're right. We fail to kind of look at that escalation cycle, if it were, as a correct, it's not necessarily the complete correct term for describing it, but it is. It's that long, the history between the two people, and how that interacts and how they interact with each other. But something that's important to keep in mind here too is that we also have behaviors as leaders and managers, and our behaviors are also very much motivated or regulated by the environment that surrounds us. So we could be saying a certain thing or doing a certain thing, and that could also be affecting the person's behavior. And it's often really hard for us as leaders and managers to look at that, to see our own behaviors as being part of that person's environment as well. And I think that's also something to keep in mind, that everybody's behavior affects, if there's two people in a room, there are two behaviors and there's two sets of antecedents and consequences, and most likely they're interrelated.
Yeah, the sort of the butterfly effect of behavior, and that it's like this social ecosystem within a organization. I know it's true in cafes because you have a stressful couple of hours, for instance, like in the holidays when we're recording this interview. We're in the middle of a super busy season in retail. And by the time this interview airs, we'll all be licking our wounds in January and thinking, maybe I shouldn't have said that. Maybe I should have been more patient with that customer or my coworker. But the environment itself was just ripe for that kind of conflict. And I wonder, since we're talking about, what gives rise to it, where, in your experience, having been called in for many different kind of dysfunctional team problems, what gives rise to dysfunction in teams most often?
I think one of the major things that I've seen, just in my career in general, is one of the times we have a lot of behavior issues is when there's communication breakdowns or communication issues between people. It's like we have a failure to communicate, but I think that's a lot of the reasoning why some things happen within teams is, the communication styles either don't mesh, or maybe somebody's not communicating to everybody on the team, and that falls into an issue. So I think I do feel strongly that I think teams break down when the communication breaks down, and that's a skill set and a performance behavior that people need to really be thinking about and be cognizant of, especially in those high stress environments, because there's going to be a lot of those antecedents or triggers, if you will, for problems to arise, and being able to kind of problem solve and work through that and communicate with your team is really important and kind of can help build that relationship across the board. But I do feel like communication breakdowns is probably one of the number one things I see when teams break down.
Yeah, amen. There are a ton of different forms of communication that we have in the midst of any organization, like whether it's text or phone or paper or face-to-face, and where usually we end up trying to communicate in the most convenient way, which seems leaves nuance on the side of the road, and it creates this environment where, as managers, we like to communicate in mass email, or we create a team meeting. In the cafes where I manage, we have team meetings. But then there's the individual component, because that's what a team actually is, right? Individuals. And so I wonder if you could talk to us about the importance then of having the individual focus to influence the team. Why is that important?
Sure. So it is important to think about the team as a whole, and we can do that from a behavior analytic perspective too, by breaking down those antecedents and consequences that happen during the team's performance. But it's also important to look at each person on the team as an individual. And as a leader and manager, we really need to be developing our communication style and methods to match the person that we're working with and their communication style and methods. And I think what you mentioned earlier about, we do tend to send mass emails out to everyone, which, they do serve a purpose because everybody's getting the same message at the same time. And, I think that is something that is important. And even like the team meeting on a daily basis. I used to be a CEO of a small services division, and we would have our daily huddles every morning, and we would make sure that everybody was on the same page for what our goals were for the day. And I think that is important still to do from a team perspective, but it's also really important to make sure as a leader and a manager, you're having those one-on-one conversations with your team members, to build that individual relationship, but also to learn how the individuals on your team communicate, how they interact socially, which is very important from a team perspective, because you want to make sure that everybody can kind of work together to develop skills that people may not necessarily have. Or if they do have those skills, maybe they can then in turn teach other people on the team that don't have those skills. So it's really important to get to know your team and their communication styles.
Yeah, and you're studying them in a sense, not in a weird laboratory sense, but
no,
just it's kind of your job as a manager to not only understand the workflow of the work, but also maybe what makes your people tick. And I know that when I've had staff meetings where I know I didn't have a good rapport with every individual, or at least I haven't really communicated as much with some as I had with others. And it always makes it really awkward. And you can sense that you're not getting 100% buy-in.
That is a really good point. Building that relationship within your team members can definitely help motivate their performance when they're working with each other and with you. It's really, in behavior analysis, we call it pairing. So pairing yourself with being reinforcing and being, a positive influence on your team members' interaction at work. So it is very, very important for us as leaders and managers to pair and build that rapport with our team members.
So we have this team of people then that we want to build individual relationships with, and we want to create a great environment for them to thrive, maybe remove obstacles that would create behaviors that we don't want. So we won't have to call Beth in to solve the problem. What are the most important components of healthy team behavior, and then what are the individual behaviors as you're developing these relationships and coaching that give rise to them?
Sure. So the 5 kind of components of healthy team behavior that I see, and I work in a lot of different environments, not just social services, but working in different offices and workplaces, and I think across the board, the 5 most important things that I've seen to focus as goals for teams are really looking at organizational skills as a team, functional communication, social skills, problem-solving skills, and as a team, emotional regulation.
Mm-hmm.
And I say that with a little wink and a nod, but yeah, I think of emotional regulation as when we're in the heat of a moment, how can we keep our cool? How can we make sure we're not going to be screaming at each other behind the bar or behind the doors when everything closes? So how can we navigate that together as a team?
Yeah. So when we're talking about those 5 things, there are individual behaviors that give rise to them. And so I wonder, when I am as a leader, I want to see those 5 things happen with John, with Marcy, with everyone on the team, right? So it sounds like what I have to do is kind of keep a list of those things with me and assess them with the individuals. Like, what is a practical way for me to be able to go forward and say, here are the 5 components I want to see in each person, and therefore it'll kind of come into the team. What's a practical first few steps for me to be able to implement those?
I think the first step would be to define under each of those headings, what behaviors do you want to see? So for organizational skills, those behaviors might be breaking tasks down and automating them within team members so that responsibilities are very clear and spread out across the board, and not one person's doing everything. And the team has to, everybody is given that very clear job responsibility. So, definitely making sure you're defining that. As far as defining your communication, what is it, or even defining the communication style that you want your team members to be engaging in. So what does that look like? Is it, when we're in the heat of the moment, if I say something to you in a demand, please don't take it personally. This is how I react when I'm frustrated or when I'm feeling a lot of pressure, kind of outlining those communication behaviors up front is important. So I really think it's important for us as, if we were to come into a team to assess these kind of 5 different components, breaking each one into observable and measurable behaviors, and what do they look like, and what do you want to see from your particular team under each of those headings. Okay.
So each person is going to have something, each leader is going to have some different ideal for communication and the rest of it. So I guess you would have to know first what your ideal is, but I find that so many of us who are in management positions or leadership positions, oftentimes we wonder about these questions when it's our first time doing it. We don't know what our communication style is necessarily, so we can't really tell people what kind of a manager we're going to be. So it sounds like we just need to figure out, like, what is the goal for my team? So given that most people are sort of in a situation where they want to influence change, whether they're new in the position or not, I mean, how do they go about changing the team dynamic and take that first step of action?
Sure. I think the first is, like you said already, just definitely defining your team, defining your mission. What is your team's purpose? What is the, what is the reason you guys are there every day and doing your jobs? I think that's really, really important, is to kind of define your team, figure out what the purpose of that team is, what's the mission. You may be working for a larger corporation or organization that has their own mission, but I do think it's important for teams to also create their own mission and vision for each individual team. So kind of defining that, and what does that mean for each person. I also think it's important as a new leader to get your team's input on that. So not coming in and saying broadly, this is the vision and mission of our team, but really having that one-on-one discussion with your team members and hearing their input as far as what their mission and vision is for why they're working there and why they're doing, why they're performing their job every day. And incorporating that into one cohesive document or phrase or something that all team members can kind of get behind. That's the first step, I think, and is important for new leaders. The second thing is really to figure out how are you going to motivate your team's performance. So everybody does things for a reason, going back to the functional behavior assessment. So why does your team exist? What is your team's purpose? Why do they do what they need to do? And then motivating that. So how can I get my team to meet that mission, that values, those goals I set, those performance goals I set? How can I get my team to do that? And it's really thinking about motivation. So for a lot of people, they might, a lot of times behavior analysts have come into organizations and have worked with organizations on incentive systems, point systems, kind of defining behaviors and giving points to certain behaviors that occur throughout the day, which then in turn, sometimes people use like company stores and things like that. Some places use, points that they can trade in for trips and vacations. And obviously you have to know what your budget is before you start doing something like that. But those are more like extrinsic, reinforcers, as we would call them in my field. But also looking at building your team as a whole. So motivating their performance by making it socially reinforcing for them to be around each other every day. How can you do that as a leader? How can you make it? And that's not to say people are people. There are always going to be people who don't necessarily always get along, who don't mesh for whatever reason. But how can we kind of work through that as a team and make it reinforcing for us to all be around each other? Because, most teams spend the majority of their waking hours with each other. So how can we motivate that, those social behaviors, and how can we motivate our team to engage with each other, so that everybody really wants to be around each other. Sometimes people do team building days. I used to use a kudos jar when I was a CEO. I implemented a kudos jar where I was really focused on building the social behavior of my team members to really reinforce each other's behavior. So it was really, it was a little note jar I kept where, I was really like I said, I was focused more on the social performance in that aspect rather than the actual job performance. And that I wanted to keep, them, making sure that they're praising each other for certain things that they see that each other did, or thanking each other for things that they did throughout the day. Cause we worked in a really high stress environment. So, it was really important for me to kind of build those social skills with my team. So I used that kudos jar, and then once a week I would pull out 2 names, or I would pull out a little note card, and whoever received the kudos got a gift card, and whoever gave the kudos got a gift card as well. Nice. Because I wanted to make sure I was reinforcing both behaviors. And then it was nice for the team too, because even if you didn't get a gift card, you still got your kudos for the week from your team members. So everybody got a nice little paper on what they did great that week. So, something like that, something simple like that. And it didn't take a lot of money. It was like $10 gift cards. So it really wasn't a lot of money, but it was something that, I was really focused, for me for that particular team, I was focused on building the social skills component of my team as a behavior. So that's one example.
That's great. I like the idea of a kudos jar. I like thinking about how we have opportunity to reinforce all throughout the day. That's just free and available to do just verbally with people if we have the intention to do so as we come in. And it just seems like, is there a danger in using or thinking that we've exhausted options to reinforce these behaviors? We need to find an extrinsic motivator. We need to find a method or a tool when it may be just as simple as a relationship?
I think it's both. I think people, I do think those extrinsic things can be helpful, especially to kind of get you to that point where you're building a relationship with someone. Maybe that will be the extra push to motivate them to get past whatever the past history has been with that individual. And then once you're there, that's really where you can build that relationship, and it becomes more intrinsic social reinforcers, if you will, with the individual, because you've kind of built that relationship. So I think a lot of times we look at the extrinsic to get us there, and then we kind of move to that intrinsic social reinforcer to be the ultimate motivator for why we're going to keep engaging with that person. So yeah, I think it can be both. I don't think it should just be one or the other. And I think maybe one leads to the other sometimes. And, I think as leaders, we need to be open to all options, but, building a rapport is really important. Pairing with people is really important, especially as a leader. And really figuring out from your team members, what are the things that motivate them in their day to day? Why are they there performing that job? And how can you as a team, as a leader, help them? How can you help them meet their goals? And I think if you, as a leader, really sit and listen to each person and they feel that they're heard, that relationship will develop.
Oh, do you just straight up ask them that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it might seem a little weird, especially if you haven't been previously doing that, but you have to take the first step somehow, someday. So, even if it is, every day is a new day. So take the first step the next day and, just ask them out, how can I help you? How can I help you get to where you want to go? And what do you see for your vision for yourself in this team, and then also for yourself in your career? And then as a leader, how can I help you get there?
No, that would be fantastic. I do feel like it's as simple as asking, and then at the same time, it's like, I don't know, for me, that when something awkward happens on TV, some people can watch it, but in a show, like if somebody is walking in on an awkward scene, I just can't even look at the TV. I just have this seriously, I feel like I have to leave the room or something, like, oh, when is it going to pass? So in this situation where somebody knows that you're a procrastinating leader, or you haven't had your one-on-ones with them in a long time, or at all ever, and all of a sudden you've got this injection of purpose and you're sitting people down, there's some fear there. There's as a leader, how do we define that fear that keeps people from taking these necessary first steps to create great teams?
I think those fears can be very valid. Obviously that's that person's perspective. I think the number one thing there is looking at if I am to come into this scenario and start all of a sudden having these one-on-ones with my team members, and they've never had these before with me, they're going to reject this somehow, or they're going to reject my ideas, or they might just give me one-word answers, and then I hear later that they were talking behind my back about what I said. And these are all things that are fears, but may not necessarily happen. And I think to take the first step and at least explain to your team or define for your team why you're doing what you're doing. And we're doing this so that we can kind of grow together as a team. Even kind of admitting your past failure. I failed you as a leader because I have not done this before, or I don't do this enough and I should be doing this more often. Kind of opening up that vulnerability to your team members is a good thing. So, maybe that could be how you start the conversation, and then they can kind of see that, you really care about this discussion. It's not just something that you're doing, but opening up that discussion with that past vulnerability a little bit, and, maybe they'll be more open to it. But I think just getting past it getting past that fear and just doing it. It's going to be an important step, and then continuing to do it. So figuring out a way for yourself how to motivate your behavior as a leader to make sure you keep having these meetings with your team members.
Because you might not have success the first month or two,
Nope.
or
Nope.
the first year, depending on the size of your organization or the size of the problem, I guess.
And that's the thing about behavior analysis. It does take time. Behaviors do take time to shape and develop. And especially if these behaviors, the problem behaviors, have been around for a while. But if you stick with the intervention, if you feel, or what your plan is, if you feel like this is something that, that is important to me, and I think it's important for my team. So even if the employees are rolling their eyes at you, in the first couple of meetings, you want to keep doing it, because interventions and this building of a relationship can take a lot of time. And we say in behavior analysis, this is, it's not a magic wand or a magic pill. It's going to take some time. And I think if you're committed to changing your team's behavior and your behavior as a leader, you have to keep doing it.
And you have to notice it, right? You have to notice you doing things. You have to notice, well, I guess we don't really have a problem noticing other people doing things we don't like. But to approach it from such a measured approach, it takes a good deal of self-awareness and patience. I was thinking something earlier in the conversation, and I think it's worth bringing up. I think we are assuming that every leader has the best of intentions. And sometimes, even though we want just a successful business, we ourselves could potentially, correct me if I'm wrong, we could use behavior analysis in the wrong ways. We could use it technically in a correct way, but we can influence people towards a negative end, right?
Yes, I always say this, and I'm actually, I teach some college courses in behavior analysis, and I always say this to my students when I start to introduce some of these very powerful principles. With great power comes great responsibility. So we have to be really cautious about using these very, very strong interventions. And making sure we're doing it in an ethical manner. We as behavior analysts have an ethical code that we follow, and that's really what kind of mediates how we perform our day-to-day lives. But it's important for managers and leaders to have, even an ethical code for themselves to follow, and making sure that, they are very powerful tools, and with power comes great responsibility.
Oh yeah. Well, Peter Parker. Wise words. And I wonder then, how do I do that? If I'm a manager listening to this, and I happen to be, how do I come up with some kind of a code for myself that will allow me to use these tools of management in an ethical way?
I think ultimately, and maybe this is just me being a little bit naive, but I think if you come at it from the perspective that you want to help the people that are on your team reach their goals and reach their, develop their own skills as, whatever it is that they're working on, I think you're going to follow that. But it needs to come from a place that not a selfish place, but a place where you want to legitimately help another person and help that person succeed and shape their development.
That's just a great point, because we do need to figure out how to be at least a little bit altruistic in the way that we apply our authority, and the power differential between manager and employee, or boss and employee, is, makes or breaks a person's spirit, and thus goes the team. So, and you said shaping development, and that reminds me of something. That sounds like the company that you started, right?
Yes, that's correct. So I started Shaping Development back in July. It's it's consulting agency. We're really focused on using the principles of behavior analysis to shape individual, staff, and organizational development. That's our mission. We're really focused on helping other people kind of figure out what things they want to learn and what skills they want to develop, and then coming up with evidence-based plans on how to get there. So that's really what we do.
Just this whole conversation has been really eye-opening for me in particular, because, we in coffee, we are using a product that is a product of its environment. A
Yes.
bean is created, or the seed of the coffee fruit is created according to extrinsic motivations, and all of the factors that go into it create its potential when it's under pressure, just like people. There's so many. I love metaphors. But yeah.
I love this metaphor too, because I love coffee.
Yeah. And you actually started a coffee company as well because of your love of coffee, right?
Yes. So your viewers are going to think, or your listeners are going to think, I probably don't have a life, but I actually did start a second business. So I have Shaping Development. I started back in July, and then I started a second business back in October, combining, it's really just kind of my side business, but it's my passion project right now. I love coffee and I love behavior analysis. And one of the things that I'm really focused on is disseminating behavior analysis to people and who may not know what it is or even know what behavior analysis is about. So I decided to combine my two loves, and I partnered with a local roaster, Philly Fair Trade Roasters, and we created a blend called and I created my company. It's called Operant Coffee and Operant Conditioning Behavior. That's a nod to behavior analysis.
All right.
Yeah, and we created a blend that is made from coffee that's fair trade certified. The roasters I work with are committed to, in behavior analysis, we always have this phrase where we're saving the world with behavior analysis, and they're committed to really looking at saving the world with, sustainable environmental business practices. So they compost, they recycle, all during the production of the coffee. And, I really think that's important. And I think that from a coffee industry, I think behavior analysis can bring a lot to the table, especially as I'm learning new things. And I am so new to this field, trust me. But, I do think behavior analysis can bring something to the table to the coffee industry as far as looking at it, the production as a behavior and looking at all of the things that surround it. And it's something I'm passionate about. So hopefully my science can help the coffee industry, and, hopefully, we can kind of work together as partners moving forward. So that was kind of like my little passion project, and I started that back in October.
Sweet. Wow. So I can say pretty easily that you brought a lot to the table here. And the principles that you've talked about for behavior analysis, obviously those are going to play into lots of different parts of the value chain of coffee as we talk about farmers who are, there's owners of farms that manage farmers who pick the coffee who could benefit from behavior analysis.
Definitely.
There are people working together. There's no one person doing one thing that represents an entirety of particular link in the value chain. So team effort is at each particular link, and certainly hope that the message that you're trying to get out there with behavior analysis is heard and applied. And here I feel like if we do that, we're going to just have healthier teams in our cafes. So how can people find, what's the website for Shaping Development and Operant Coffee?
Sure. So Shaping Development's website is shapingdevelopment.com, exactly how it's spelled. Operant Coffee is operantcoffee.com, and Operant spelled OPERANT coffee.com. So that's our two websites.
Sweet. And if people want to get out and hire you for their teams, they just go to shapingdevelopment.com?
That's correct.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the show and helping us just learn more about our own behaviors and helping shape and develop our teams.
Well, thanks so much. It is such an honor to be on here. I love listening to your podcast, and it has taught me a lot about coffee, being a newbie. So I really appreciate it.
Oh, shucks. Well, thank you again so much. You know, couple those elements of a healthy team with the factors that give rise to behavior. We can pay attention to and curate the environment to help mitigate certain behaviors and encourage others. And we, as leaders, want to provide an environment that provides as few roadblocks to positive behavior as possible. And this conversation really just got me thinking about how many things I probably miss in the environment, you know, because I might be frustrated with the way somebody behaves, but in reality, the environment that I perpetuate, even with my own actions and behaviors, my behaviors become a part of their environment and their behavior becomes a part of mine. It gives rise to these behaviors. So when I start to take a little bit more of an outside view of things, and I don't start to get super emotional about it or just frustrated, and I don't take a measured and critical eye to it, then it just starts to be this blame game where I attribute certain characteristics to an individual, and then just that's the explanation. It seems from our conversation with Beth that we have more control over the environment and thus the behavior that is usually a reaction to the environment than we know. And I hope that this episode has really helped us see that, you know, there are things that we can do to help people succeed in adopting behaviors that not only benefit the organization, but also benefit them in the vision and mission they have for working in the organization. So my thanks to Beth for talking with us about behavior analysis. And if you want to know more about what Beth does, you can go to her website, shapingdevelopment.com. And also her coffee company is operantcoffee.com. And in addition to that, Beth recommends as a introduction to applied behavior analysis, you can go to abainternational.org, ABA standing for Applied Behavior Analysis. So abainternational.org gives a good introduction for this subject and also the subheadings of that subject that might apply to your organization, like organizational behavior management is kind of a subsection of applied behavior analysis, and that's something that you might be interested in as well. So take this information, apply it to your cafe. If you want to reach out to me, it's chris@keystotheshop.com. I would encourage you to do so if you have questions or comments, suggestions, things that I can do to help you and also to help make this show a better show for your career, to be more of a useful tool for you in shaping and developing your coffee journey. The show notes for this episode are available online on our resources page, and you could have the show notes delivered to your inbox as well. When you go to keystotheshop.com, you'll have an opportunity to enter your email to receive the show notes in your inbox on a weekly basis. And in addition to the show notes, every now and then you'll receive some more resources in that email that are designed and curated to help you in your career. Just things from online, interesting articles, stories, tools, things like that. So just enter your email and that'll come to you really conveniently to your inbox on a weekly basis. So thank you very much again for joining me on the show. I appreciate your time. I appreciate you listening. Make sure you're subscribed to the show, comment, and rate our show on iTunes. And have an amazing week. And as always, I truly hope that this episode has provided you with keys to the shop.